For more on the many unanswered questions, let's turn now to Gerald Posner, the investigative journalist and author of Why America Slept, the Failure to Prevent 9/11, who has also long been following this extraordinary anthrax story. As always, sir, a pleasure.
Good to see you, Keith.
There seem to be only two paths we could go down here, and they're both pretty bad. A, this was a man working for the government, and he acted alone for whatever those motives might have been. Or B, this was a guy working for the government, and he didn't act alone. Is there any indication at this point which of those is the likelier path?
No, there's not, Keith. And the frustrating part of this is I hate it as an investigative reporter when a cold case like this is closed by suicide. I've been talking to Justice Department sources today. Let me tell you, they are rushing to wrap this thing up. They want it over with. His suicide, as far as they're concerned, is the end of it. We're never going to know, even if he was the person who was involved in actually pulling the anthrax out and doing it, whether he was part of a larger conspiracy or whether he's just the cutout and today he's dead, because they're not going to pursue this investigation. There's no outcry for it. That's unfortunate.
For the sake of caution, and maybe we can do the outcry later, let's proceed down the loner path. What are there theories about what his motive might have been? Could this have been as comparatively contained as the story from Boston 30 years ago? They were going to close at firehouses, and suddenly there was this rash of arson fires, which turned out to have been set by the firemen who did not want to see their firehouses closed. And was this self-protection? Was this self-interest? Could Dr. Ivins have somehow been protecting his own turf?
There doesn't appear to be as much self-protection, but those I talked to today who wanted to at least speculate, who had been around the investigation on this, said that they thought it was more a case in which he was somebody who wanted to almost test the quality of this anthrax by actually seeing it in action. Sort of like the Tylenol killer years ago, who put in, remember, items sent out Tylenol, and a dozen people ended up dead around the country, and we never found who was responsible for that. Here you have a case in which you might have an unusual, somewhat eccentric loner described with homicidal tendencies according to his therapist who had a restraining order against him. He fits the profile for somebody who might do something like this deranged, but again, we won't know because the FBI in its handling of it allowed him to stay out there long enough that he was able to kill himself instead of bringing him in and locking him up for questioning.
Well, it's more than just what his therapist said. His brother told David Willman, who we just heard from the LA Times, that he thought he was omnipotent. So we're talking about somebody who didn't seem to be altogether there. But let me switch over to the other half of this. The government's reaction through this, from the investigation to the Bush administration reaction, the leaks tying all of this to Iraq, getting the wrong man, Hatfield, and dogging him for years, letting the other guy continue to work at Fort Detrick. He was still there till weeks ago, and then close in on him so slowly that he has time to go into the psychiatric ward and then get out and then reportedly kill himself. It smells terribly bad. Is it as bad? Is it conceivably as bad as it smells?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a case where you can just say, look, it's been bungled from the start. It was bungled from the very beginning when they went after Hatfield. They had the wrong person. Now they claim, and if you read the LA Times article, it's very clear on this, that they have new DNA technology which isolates it to a specific strain of this type of anthrax, and that's why they know that he handled it. There's a debate over that. In addition, you're talking about the most secure lab in America for this type of bacteriological warfare items, and there are cameras all over in security items, and supposedly he went down and swabbed with all types of material like chlorine and bleach areas around his desk where spores were from the anthrax, and nobody ever saw him on a security camera. The FBI never picked up any example of this, and meanwhile, as you showed with McCain, back in just a month after 2001, they are already beating the war drums in the Republican Party that there might be a tie to this anthrax attack to Iraq. There wasn't an iota of evidence to support that at the time. There isn't today. It was irresponsible at the time. It's irresponsible today. This man's death shows that, and that there's no answer from the Bush administration. They never had a lie leading up to the war in Iraq and scaring this country into it that they shied away from, and anthrax was one of those that they embraced.
This was American anthrax used to kill Americans. That's the one conclusion I think we can draw out of this. But the other thing becomes that point that you just raised about Iraq. It's not just what John McCain said one night on Letterman's show. It was dozens of tips provided by supposedly reliable sources inside the government. One can't imagine they were all wrong. Do you see a scenario in which simply this government took advantage of this situation? Whether or not, let's assume for a moment there's no proactivity, that this was Dr. Ivins flipping out to whatever degree was required to do this, that the government simply took advantage of this to use it as a tool to build up a case to go to a war in Iraq?
I have absolutely no doubt about that. From everything that I've done on my own investigation and following up from 2001, I'm now more convinced than ever that there were individuals inside the Bush administration and in the government who wanted the war in Iraq so badly that they decided if there was something that they could use to push it forward, they would. Anthrax fell into their lap. Even if he is the deranged solo killer, they used it in order to scare this country and say, Iraq's somebody we have to go after, and we did.
And in that context, there would be no rush to find the deranged solo killer.
They could rely on the blunders of the FBI.
Indeed. Investigative journalist Gerald Posner, as always, great thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks, Keith.